y'all screwed up. Plain and simple, y'all screwed up. That was me telling the Tarrant Appraisal District Board of Directors that they just screwed up. Their screw up exposed how our property tax system in Texas is unconstitutional, and I'm going to prove it to you by the end of this video. Their mistake is going to cost 40 teachers their jobs. If they lose funding and it causes 40 teachers to lose their jobs, that's on you guys. Plain and simple, y'all screwed it up. You're going to screw it up for the entire state. I'm going to show you how you've been lied to right and left and how you've been taken advantage of in our property tax system without ever knowing it. You're going to hear stuff you've never heard ever before. Pay attention till the end so we can spread the word and let other people know. We've got to expose this. Here we go. Right up front, I want to touch on the property taxes are unconstitutional piece of all this because that's a pretty major claim. First, let's read the Constitution. Article 8, Section 1E of our Texas State Constitution says, state ad valorem taxes prohibited. No state ad valorem taxes shall be levied upon any property within this state. But Chandler, I know exactly who gets my money because this is what my property tax bill looks like. Yes, you might see that the city gets a chunk and the county gets a chunk and all these other taxing entities get a chunk of your money. And the school district is supposed to get the largest chunk of your money, but how do you know for sure? Have you ever wondered where your money actually goes after you write that check to the tax assessor? Do you know what happens when the school district gets their money? Do they actually get to keep it? Or does a big chunk of that money actually end up going to the state? Well, I can tell you for a bunch of you that the state does end up getting a big chunk of that money. You might be thinking, wait a second, Chandler, I know. This is called the Robin Hood program, where they take money from the rich school districts and they give it to the poor school districts, and you would be right. It's called recapture technically, but what happens if they take from the rich school districts, but it never gets distributed out to the poor school district? What happens then when you pay your property tax payment? If it goes to the state, it's not spent on the school district. What if it's spent on something entirely different? Well, I know what that looks like to me. What does that look like to you? That looks like a state property tax. All right, you got my attention with the unconstitutional thing. I'm sick of property taxes. I'd like to stop paying them. I want to hear more about that. But before we start talking about firing teachers, I just have to say, enough of my money is going to the school district. They get the biggest part of my tax bill, and all I see them do is build stadiums. And I'm thinking, maybe this whole teacher thing is their problem. Maybe they need to fix their own finances. But one thing I don't understand is how every time I hear something coming out of the school district, all I hear is how they're out of money and they need more money and they're having financial troubles. And I'm just thinking, the audacity. Maybe I'm missing something. Like, how's that even possible? Well, you're not going to like it, but I do have the answers. These are all the same questions I started asking as I became aware of the problems and understanding how things worked. And I dove deeper and deeper and realized it was pretty easy to catch on to the lies that the appraisal district and the cities play. They're always juggling around this formula where property value times tax rate equals our tax bill. So if they brag about lowering the tax rate and act like they're doing us a favor, all while the appraisal district jacks up our value, guess what? They're going to get the same amount of money or more, even if they do lower the tax rate. We're seeing through those lies. And this year, the appraisal district says they're going to freeze our values. But I know plenty of people whose values still went up 10%. And we all know, even if they did freeze the value, all they got to do is jack up the tax rate. They're going to get their money one way or the other. And we're seeing through this. You can't fool us. The only way they quit taking money out of our pocket is if they quit spending it. If they pass the no new revenue rate, that cuts right through all the baloney. But then I dug deeper and deeper. The deeper I dove into property tax, the more I realized our property tax system is designed and set up to facilitate public school funding. Yes, The city and the county both depend on our property tax system, but if there's a problem there, we can solve those problems locally. Those are local property taxes, not the public school though. That's a state tax. It's a system designed and implemented, facilitated by the state. And it's set up just like the Mafia. I'm not even kidding. So the legislature is like the Godfather, and they're like, oh gosh, here we go. They're like, hey, I'm gonna need some money. That's a horrible impersonation. But anyway, they say, hey, we're gonna need some money. Here's the parameters. Here's what all of the school districts are allowed to charge. Here's the limits of the tax rates they can impose upon the citizens, the taxpayers. And they assign the job of keeping track of all that and disseminating that information. They assign that job to the Texas Education Agency, or the TEA. That's like the how do you say it? Conciliary of the crime family. So the TEA implements the rules, and they hire the muscle, or the comptroller, to go and threaten to bust the kneecaps of the appraisal district, but it's not actually that way. So they send the comptroller out and they say, hey, comptroller, you need to hold the appraisal district accountable. And so what we're going to do is you focus on the appraisal district, you audit them and make sure they're doing their job. Make sure that the appraisal district is jacking up the values and they're doing a halfway decent job, and you got to keep them in line. And I'll tell you what, if the appraisal district gets caught slipping, what we'll do is we'll come over there and we'll bust the kneecaps of the school districts. And so then what'll happen is we'll go ahead and that'll get all the teachers mad at the appraisal district, and that's our accountability system, and we'll just sit back and orchestrate the whole thing. But better than that, what we'll do is we'll create a system so that the teachers and the administrators and the schools and the cities, the people actually spending the money and setting the tax rates, we'll get them in the building at the appraisal district running the show, and we'll just orchestrate this whole thing. And it'll be like, hey, tell you what, go out there and generate some money, and we're gonna fund this whole thing. And I think you're gonna like it. That's how it goes. All right, that's as good as it's gonna get. But that's it. Let me explain how they get the people inside the appraisal district to run the show over there. On the surface, it appears as though the chief appraiser is running the entire show at the appraisal district, and they are. But just like any boss, that boss, they got a boss too, and you're not going to get to meet the boss's boss. The boss's boss at the appraisal district is the board of directors. That's who ultimately gets to decide the policies. They get to decide the budget, and they can fire the chief appraiser if they don't like what's going on there. So you tell me who's in charge. Ultimately, it's going to be the board of directors. Well, how do we determine who's going to fill the seats on the board of directors? Up until recently, there was only one way to do this. The taxing entities themselves got to decide who is sitting on that board. That's right. The people passing the tax rates and spending your money were the same exact people running the show at the appraisal district. That's how it's set up. Let me break it down. The way it works is that every major county has an election or an appointment process. It's really an election, but since it's not open to the public, we'll call it an appointment process. They look at how many seats are up for re-election, how many seats need to be filled, and then they take 1,000 votes for every seat and add them together. And then they spread those across the whole county. So if there's only 2 seats up for re-election, then there are 2,000 total votes. If there are 5 seats for re-election, then there are 5,000 total votes. And they'll divide up those 5,000 votes to all of the schools and the cities and the county itself and any major taxing entity in that county. They all get a certain number of votes. Well, the number of votes they get is in direct proportion with the amount of property tax revenue that that taxing entity imposes on its citizens, okay? And so if you are familiar with how your tax bill works, you know exactly how they calculate this. They take the property value that's set by the appraisal district and they multiply that by the tax rate, and that equals your tax bill. Well, what they do is they just take your tax bill and everybody else's tax bill in that taxing entity and they total it up. and they compare the total amount of property taxes generated for, let's say, Fort Worth ISD, and they compare that to the city of Southlake, or they compare that to the city of Pantego. And the more they tax their citizens, the more votes they get, the more power and control that taxing entity can assert over the appraisal district. Let me connect the dots for you if you haven't already connected them yourself. So what that means is the areas that have the higher priced homes get more power, more control, and the politicians that spend more of your money get more power and more control. It means that the rich have power over the poor, and the politicians that try and cut taxes and drop the rate, they are disincentivized and they lose power to the politicians and bureaucrats that increase their taxes. The more the bureaucrat taxes its citizens, the more power and control they get over the appraisal district. I don't know how that all sounded to you. I know how it sounded to me, though. That sounded disgusting. What's even worse is that everything I just said is absolutely true. But the good news is that most people are decent people. As much as you don't want to believe it, as bad of an experience as you might have had at the appraisal district or in a hearing, or as bad as your tax bill has been, most of the people involved in the whole system, including the Mafia, including the TEA, and all this stuff I'm talking about, I've said a lot of things that sound really bad. It's because we've all had a bad experience. And it's not that anybody's trying to take advantage of you. It's just that very few people in the process have had a reason to truly care about you. And that's what breeds most of the problems. Most of the employees at the appraisal district are just good people wanting to go to work, abide by the law, get a good performance review, and go home at 5 o'clock. And that's it. Call it a day. So whenever things started to get out of control in property taxes, it's when property values started to increase quite a bit. And I saw the need. I started helping people. Well, what happened was I started creating more work for the people at the appraisal district. And what I found was some people inside the appraisal district, some employees, they were inspired that I was trying to help people for free, and the employees started to help me, but not all of them. Some of those employees started to hate me, including a couple that just happened to be at the very top. They started filing complaints against me, trying to get me to stop helping taxpayers free of charge, which is what I was doing. Thankfully, the taxpayers here in Tarrant County wouldn't stand for it. They stood up, and I didn't take it, and they didn't take it, and we stood up. We demanded change, and as a result, we have seen quite a bit of change. I'm not going to go into all of it. All I can say is this. Now, as a result of all that, the legislature looked at what was happening in Tarrant County, and they said, I think part of the problem here is that there's not anybody involved in the process at the appraisal district that has an assigned authority to look after taxpayers, or an assigned duty to look after the interest of taxpayers. So the legislature saw a need to create a position for them to have 3 taxpayer representatives on the board of directors looking out for me and you. And to that, I say, hallelujah, bravo, praise Jesus, and things have changed considerably since then. So on the very first election of these taxpayer representatives trying to gain seats on the board at the board of directors for the appraisal district, they started campaigning on very pro-taxpayer friendly things, what we wanted to hear as taxpayers, which was, we're going to try not to increase property values every year like you've been accustomed to. I mean, just a few years ago, property values were going up 20% in 1 year. Whoa. So yeah, that sounds great. So they ran on that, but they actually had no clue whatsoever. And it's not because they're dumb. It's because nobody has any clue when they start out in property taxes. Nobody could imagine the steep learning curve that you have to go through, plus to know all the history. I mean, Every single year, I learned something basic, foundational every single year. And I've been doing this full time pretty much since 2017. This year I'm protesting for 40,000 people and I'm learning new stuff this year. It's absolutely staggering how much there is to learn. So they just decided they were going to take up their campaign promise. They got elected and they hit the ground running, and they were trying to figure out how they're going to implement this idea of not increasing property values every year. How could they keep them the same year after year? Well, they figured it out. They tried a couple of things and then they settled into an every other year type of cadence. And so that was going to work pretty well, except for one little caveat. It's where the muscle comes in, the comptroller. They're going to hold the appraisal district accountable. And if the appraisal district keeps values here, but the true market value, the comptroller, if the comptroller says that value should be here, the comptroller is going to get out the baton and start beating teachers on the knees, so to speak, figuratively, metaphor. Nobody's doing this for real, but what's going to happen is it is going to, for real, make teachers mad. Instead of beating them on the knees, what's going to happen is they're going to withhold funding, okay, through the arm of the TEA, through the mechanisms that the legislature has laid out. They're going to withhold funding from the school districts. That's going to get teachers and school districts mad. They're going to come and get mad at the appraisal district, and the appraisal district's going to be like, what? We were just trying to help taxpayers. Yeah, but the whole mafia system is at play here, and if you don't understand where the booby traps are, they're going to get their way, and they don't solve problems on a local level. Remember, it's a state property tax, so they solve these problems on the state level. That's right. It's the state that says, hey, I'm going to tell you what you're going to like. I'm going to tell you how much money you get. I'm going to tell you what you're going to charge these people, and you're going to do what I say, and you're going to like it, and that's the way it is, or else my muscle's going to come over, and that's how it goes, okay? So to tie up the loose ends for you, here's what happened. The Tarrant Appraisal District Board of Director taxpayer representative said, we're keeping last year's values exactly the same this year. And after years where home values are going up like 20% in 1 year, that sounds like a great idea. This year, home values only went up 2%. If they would have gone up 20%, this whole thing would have been dead in the water. But home sales were actually legitimately only 2% above where they were last year, but that's 2% for a whole county average. That's not 2% for everybody, because in Castleberry, little bitty old Castleberry, there were just a few sales that were too high. It skewed the numbers up quite a bit. And so what happened is now we're dealing with the public school funding mafia now. So the rules say that if the appraisal district's number is within 5% of the comptroller's number, we're good to go. Well, if it drops to 95% of the comptroller's number, then they're going to get a grace period. They're kind of like naughty. You better get that back in shape within 2 years. And if you don't, then you're going to be in trouble. But you've got 2 years to correct. Okay. But beyond that, if the appraisal district's number is 85.5% or worse of the comptroller's numbers, they lose money year one. What money are they losing? They're losing their Robin Hood money. When Southlake and Colleyville and Keller and the higher end areas pay their property taxes in, and the state takes what they want, and they're supposed to dole it back out to Castleberry, in a situation like this, they don't hand that money back out. It stays with the state, and that's why we got a problem here. What are they going to do? Castleberry didn't do anything wrong. It's because of the appraisal district's numbers and the sales. Something else to keep in mind, all of the citizens that live inside Castleberry ISD and pay Castleberry ISD taxes, they're not getting a tax break at all. They got to pay the same amount of taxes. This whole thing is messed up. So what are they going to do? Well, I'll tell you what they did. I got breaking news right here, right now for you. Something nobody is talking about. It is earth-shaking crazy in the nerdy property tax world that I live in. I'm going to break it down for you right now. We just had a bill pass that nobody's looking at. And I wasn't going to cover this. I was trying to get this video done really fast before the legislative session ended, because everybody was focused on this issue that's in property tax land. And everybody's like, wait a second, Representative Turner in Tarrant County filed a bill that would mandate reappraisals every single year, and everybody was kind of freaking out, taking sides. It's good, it's bad. What does it mean? Representative Guerin filed some bills that touched on this issue, but they got one bias and nobody's talking about it. So I want to tell you what just got passed. You're going to hear it before anybody else, and it's going to make some waves, but I want you to understand what you're looking at before we talk about it so that you're armed with the information. So let me break it down for you. Before I dive into this, I just need to give credit to Eric Kreil. He is the man that brought this to my attention. We were all focused on all these different bills, but he's the guy that read this sneaky little amendment that got popped in there and has changed the law. And so credit to Kreil for bringing this to my attention. He was a candidate for the Tarrant County Appraisal District Board of Directors. He was not elected, but would not doubt if this is not the last time we hear from him. Credit to Kreil. Thank you. So I'm going to go into the technical stuff, then I'll go into some pros and cons so you can kind of calibrate and decide how you want to feel about this. But here's the dilemma. Property Tax Code 2301A says, except as otherwise provided by this chapter, all taxable property is appraised at its market value as of January 1st. Seems pretty clear, right? Well, yeah. But then you come over here to section 2518, and in section B, it says the plan, and what they're talking about here is a plan for the periodic reappraisal of property approved by the Board of Directors. It's saying the plan shall provide for the following reappraisal activities for all real and personal property in the district at least once every 3 years. There it is. Over here, 1 year, January 1st, every year, market value. Over here, every 3 years. So what is it talking about here? Ultimately, what has happened in Tarrant County is they made the case that this section right here in 2518 says, oh, we can reappraise property every 3 years. And they said this section over here is talking about just, I don't know, general stuff. It doesn't have to do with much of anything. It's just, whatever. It's in the tax code. But over here, it specifically says every 3 years is okay. Well, guess what? We're not the first people to have this problem. So Webb County had this same issue, and they sent it up to Greg Abbott and said, Greg, Mr. Abbott, what are we going to do about this? Back when he was the Attorney General of Texas. And he said, you know what? These areas don't conflict. If you want to do it once every 3 years, then you have the ability to do that. These areas of the tax code don't conflict. Well, now the problem is this January 1st thing, it doesn't specifically talk about the reappraisal plan. However, breaking news right here, right now. When this piece of legislation was originally introduced, it is anything too important. Nobody really cared. In fact, kind of just went through the process. They flew through the Senate. It got recorded votes, read the third time, passed, went over to the House. It's passing with flying colors, and it just goes and goes and goes. It's read a second time. It passed to the third reading. They did a vote. Passed pretty well. Went to the third reading, and then it was amended by Representative Guerin here in Tarrant County. And what does that amendment say? Well, after it passed the House, passed the Senate, now it's headed to the governor's desk. It's as good as done. I mean, it can still get vetoed, but here's what it says. You can't find any language that you're going to care about on page 1. It's ho-hum. Yeah, it's good stuff, but not that big a deal. Here it is. Under section, whatever. The plan may not include a standard or timeline that prevents the chief appraiser from appraising property as necessary to comply with the requirements of section 2301. So here we are in an area where you can make the case that this doesn't have anything to do with an actual appraisal until you tie in the fact that the chief appraiser is appraising property according to this tax code. I think that does what everybody was fearing, and that's going to mandate all property in the state of Texas without restriction to population that I've seen. Let's go back and look. Is it talking about certain population limits? I don't see anything about that. No. Come in with a wrecking ball, just like The Godfather. Pure gangster. Slid in as an amendment before the third reading, before the final vote. Stuff doesn't change then. That's that's as mafia as I've ever seen. I tell you what. So here's the deal. Is this good or bad? How should I feel about this? Well, let's look at it. Let's just look at it. It's not all one way or the other. I've already mentioned I really like the idea of our taxpayer representatives going to bat for us, and I don't want to see that undone on the state level. In fact, I'd take one for the team and go to bat and do videos like this and do the call to action to try and save Castleberry. We're still going to try and save Castleberry because they shouldn't have to pay the price for a mistake that the appraisal district made. I just don't want to see the progress that we've made over the last several years undone. Looks like it's undone. I like the idea of the every other year appraisal. So the pros are obvious. You get 1 year relief. Every other year, if the home values are appreciating, like you're getting 1 year of relief. Now, property value times rate equals your tax bill. All they're going to do is jack up the rates. They're going to get their money one way or the other. Now, I do like the idea that it causes everybody to focus on the people that are spending our money because they got to justify the rate increase. And if they're going to spend our money and increase our rates, I want all eyeballs on them. So there's some definite benefits. I like it a lot. Now, what if property values go down, actually? What if you freeze them and you're not revaluing? Guess what? Some people are paying taxes on a house that's overvalued. And we definitely saw that in some areas here in Tarrant County. I'm protesting for a lot, getting a lot of reductions. And so the data is not always there to justify value increases. It's just the way it is. Here's a big one. If the appraisal district isn't reappraising every year, the taxing entities will blame budget issues on the appraisal district and use it as justification to sell a tax rate hike to the people and try and get stuff passed. In fact, I've just been given some inside information. That's definitely going to happen here in Tarrant County. It's definitely going to happen. And it'll be public before too long. You get a chance to vote on it. This is the biggest one. I think, if it weren't for this one, I would probably be a little bit more vocal and passionate about this. But I don't think it's the end of the world because of this issue right here. High value homes tend to benefit more because they typically appreciate at higher rates than lower end homes, and it shifts the burden to the lower end homes. So what that means is if you have a luxury home, it's more than likely going to increase in the rate of appreciation. The home value is going to increase at a higher rate than a small home, a lower end home. And so, I might say, well, that's fine because the high end homes, they're paying so much in property tax already, like they shouldn't have to pay anymore. But if the laws say that all the houses should be valued according to market value, and that's the standard, the further you get from market value, the more inaccurate the system is according to its own rules. So you might hate the rules, but I'm just looking at according to the rules, market value is the measure of how we're being taxed on a uniform and equal basis. And if the luxury homes are appreciating at a really high rate, but yet we're keeping the values the same, what happens is that burden gets shifted to the low end homes, and that's not fair to them. I don't like the idea of trampling on the little guy. I don't think that we should redistribute wealth. I also don't think that we should take it from give the big guys an advantage that causes it to be a lot worse on the small guy. I think kind of like a flat tax idea, everybody gets taxed on the same percentage level, then that's the way property taxes have worked. We can hate it all day long, but that is fair as far as our legislature has seen. And so keeping it to that standard keeps it fair. And so if you keep the values the same, then it takes that level of fairness away from it. So this isn't all good or all bad. It's a problem in the property tax system that needs to be solved. I wish that we could solve it on a local level or solve it with a little bit more nuance so we can do it in a way that's still very friendly to taxpayers and preserve this kind of momentum that we had going to advocate for the private property rights of its citizens by solving problems on a local level. Unfortunately, that isn't happening. There's your breaking news. Something tells me you wouldn't be shocked to find out that in addition to all the messed up things I've already told you about, that those aren't the only messed up things in our school funding, school finance setup here in Texas. No, There are problems all over the place. In fact, school districts are freaking out everywhere. They're all trying to figure out what to do. 80% are in some kind of financial distress. They're all going broke. Keller ISD was trying to figure out how they could save their school district, and they decided for some reason that splitting the school district in half was a good idea. That's one way I got educated on all this. I started diving deep, learning about that. I did an exhaustive 68-page report that is eye-popping on, the effect of school districts on property values and the budgets and different expenses. It was very interesting, very wild. After I published the report, one of the school board trustees read it and said, "You know what? I disagree with a lot of what you have on here." I gave him editing access. He went on and made his notes right on my report. And for the first time ever, I'm announcing you can go read his notes on my report. I'm going to link to it down below. It's on my blog. But anyway, it's just another example of how it's the system itself that's screwed up. Chandler, before you tell me that plan of yours of how we're going to bail out these teachers, I need to know about those stadiums. I don't want my money going to those stadiums because they're wasting my money over there. Let's talk about the stadiums. When we pay our property tax bill, we pay one check to the school district. The state takes whatever they take, and then the rest is left over for the school district, and then the state tells them what they're going to do with the money. So out of every dollar that the school district actually receives, a certain percentage of that goes into one bank account and another percentage goes into the other bank account. One bank account is for teachers' salaries and maintenance. The other bank account is for new construction whenever they want to build schools and stadiums. So they can actually be completely broke in the teacher salary bucket and be absolutely rich in the new construction bucket. So what's going on at Castleberry ISD is they're having a problem in the teacher salary bucket. It has nothing to do with stadiums, but yeah, it's pretty messed up. You can see a stadium being constructed at the same time they can't afford to pay their teachers, and they can't do anything about it because you can't pay money from one bank account to pay off the other one. It's totally screwed up, but that's the way it is. And here's what most people don't realize. 80% of the kids in Texas go to a public school. And when 50% of the tax revenue that's generated in Texas, about 50, it's a little less than 50%, but almost 50% of it goes to fund our public education. This is not something we should turn our backs on. We can't afford it. I'm paying for it. Our future depends on it. Our kids depend on it. And I can tell you this, my wife, my mom, my brother-in-law, my mother-in-law, I could keep going telling you the list of people that either are public educators or were. My mom still substitute teaches. I went to a public school. Doesn't mean I have to like it to fight for it. It makes about as much sense as when somebody else is president that you didn't vote for, that you're just going to flee the country or all of a sudden start hating America. Doesn't mean you have to love what's going on, but you can love what it can be and you can decide to fight for it. I believe our public schools is a great place to focus on as a battleground. When you turn your back on it and then there are problems there, then you have yourself to blame. And I think that we can rally together and put our differences aside and figure out how to help these 40 teachers that are going to get fired in Castleberry. Because if we don't do something, then those teachers are going to pay the price because of someone else's mistake. And I don't think that's right, but it doesn't stop there. When they fire the teachers, they got to move those kids to some other classroom that's already at capacity. We're going to get more than 35 students in a classroom, 35 students per teacher. That's not fair to the kids. Where does it stop? I'll tell you where it stops. It's going to stop in your backyard, because just because it's happening in Castleberry doesn't mean it's going to stop there. Next, that same kind of thing is going to happen in your school district, to your classroom with your kids, or affecting the employment of your relative that works in the public school system. And if we wait for the state to solve this problem, I guarantee they're not going to care about you near as much as me and you will. We need to take care of our own. We need to solve the problem here locally. And that's what we're going to do. Here's the plan. I have identified two possible solutions in how we can help Castleberry. Both solutions involve the cooperation of the Comptroller. And so I'm going to line both of these out. It gets technical, but this is all about the technical stuff. We're not to the stage where we grab our pitchforks and take to the streets. We're not there yet. I don't think we'll have to get there. And the reason is because most of the people that work in the comptroller's office or at the appraisal district or in the school district or anywhere involved in this, most people are just normal people that you're going to see at the grocery store, see at church, even though you might absolutely detest the job they have to do. Most of these people just got a job and they're just going to work and they're just trying to, like I said, get a good performance review and go home at 5 o'clock and go be with their family. That's the world that they live in. And so when we interact with them, I'm going to suggest that we use the same kind of demeanor that you would use when you go in to protest your property taxes. What I recommend there, when you go protest your own property taxes, is to treat the people behind the counter with some level of decency. You need to be nice to them, even though you might completely disrespect the numbers, disrespect the process, see the injustice in the whole system. The only goal in you protesting your property value is to get the value lowered. Where our only goal in this situation is to bail out Castleberry. So that's the laser focus. We need to solve the injustices of the system at the state level, and there's a time and a place for that, and we can probably get a little uglier there if we want to. All right, but for right now, here's what it is. Let's line out both technical avenues. The first solution that is hopefully easier, it has fewer moving parts. I think that this is the most likely solution to bail out Castleberry. It's found in chapter 403 of the government code, which is just hilarious to me. They don't call this the the education code or property tax code. It's just government code. It's just the government, just government. Anyway, it's the Comptroller of Public Accounts, chapter 403. If you just get to this page and hit Control F, then go to 403.303, and that's where you're going to find it. It's this section right here, and it talks about a type of protest that the school district can file. In fact, it goes through here and it talks about who can file the protest, what the timeline is, all the steps involved, and I just wanted you to see where to find it, and let me break it down for you really quick. The first thing that this area of law talks about is who can file the protest against the comptroller. Not only does it say that Castleberry ISD themselves can file the protest, but it also says that any taxpayers who have a tax bill above $100,000 can join in this protest along with Castleberry ISD, or they can file their own protest. They can either pool resources and work together or do a double attack. I don't think it does much good to do the double attack. I think everybody involved is going to be kind of on board. The comptroller needs to see that people are interested in this. The reason they let private property owners join in this, if their tax bill is above $100,000, is because if the Castleberry misses out on the state funding, they're going to have to raise the money somehow, maybe possibly by increasing the tax rate. And so that is going to affect the major property owners more than anybody else. They're going to have to pay a ton of money if the tax rate goes up, so they allow them to join in the protest. So they can pull resources, file the protest, and then take next steps. If you want to go the extra mile and find somebody whose property tax bill might be above $100,000 and see if you can get them to join in on this protest, I've already helped you with some of the legwork. Just go to my blog. I've got a list of every property owner who has a property value more than $4 million. And that is the value property that it might take to generate a $100,000 tax bill. Some of them are governments and nonprofits, so some of them might be exempt from having to pay that much in property tax. So you got to kind of look at that. But you can find those names on my website, the mailing address, all the public records are there. You might need to go to the Secretary of State website to look to see who the owners are. I'm not going to bore you with any more technical stuff than I have to, but what I did was I took the law and then just tried to boil it down into some action steps and a timeline so that if you happen to be in Castleberry or involved in trying to help this protest actually happen, you can just follow along here. I'm linking to this on my blog as well, but it gives you kind of the dates and when you need to do what. It's not comprehensive, but it is a pretty good overview. It tells you how to assemble a protest. It tells you that it's structured much like a regular property tax protest, where there's an informal and then there's a formal, and then you're going to get the decision from the protest in late July, and then in August you find out the repercussions. If it turns out that the Castleberry is going to owe money back, then they'll have to pay that money back, or they can get put on a payment plan or whatever. That's when the teeth actually sink in. Let's look at the next solution. I was digging in the property tax code and I found section 25.18 periodic appraisals, reappraisals. In section C, it says a taxing unit by resolution adopted by its governing body may require the appraisal office to appraise all property within the unit. Bingo. Castleberry ISD can call a board meeting, pass a resolution, and it forces the appraisal district to reappraise their property. I like it. But it also scares me because we're going to be trying to get the appraisal district to go up on their values. We want to make sure that they pass the property value study, but we don't want to increase anybody's taxes. So here's a really important provision. It says an appraisal made pursuant to this subsection may not be used by a taxing unit as the basis for the imposition of taxes. It's almost like they knew we needed this provision in there because there it is. I'm liking it, but we've got some roadblocks ahead of us. I'm going to tell you how we can get around them. First, the roadblocks. This section of the Comptroller's policies. This is the Texas Administrative Code here for the certification of the appraisal roll. 9.3059. It says the appraisal roll shall be submitted to the Comptroller by the deadlines in the form and manner provided by this electronic appraisal roll submission system. Here's the thing. What this is talking about is it's talking about the certified appraisal roll that the chief appraiser is in the process of doing. It's too late. The ball's already rolling. We don't want to be stuck with that. So that's a problem. Next up is the handbook of the Texas property tax rules. I think that last rule was probably in here too, but this is a little easier to read, a little easier to find. Let's go to page 11. It's the Comptroller's handbook. Right here, all of the laws that are going to restrict us, like it says 9.3059, it talks about it right there. They all point back to this paragraph, and this paragraph basically defines the fact that the appraisal roll that's submitted to the Comptroller, it must be the certified appraisal roll for the use of taxable value. Okay, so we don't want to use it for the purposes of taxing. So what we've got to do is we've got to get the Comptroller to rewrite the rules and add a different purpose for that other appraisal that we're going to force the appraiser to do, force the appraisal district to do. And so here's what we've got. New Comptroller rules. We want them to implement these policies that says upon written request of a school district, possibly under certain specified conditions, and submission of a appraisal roll recertified under exactly what I just showed you, the Comptroller may accept the roll for the purposes of this, that's the property value study tax code, even if the taxing units continue to levy tax on the original roll. Bingo, right there. If we can get them to amend that policy right here to say that right there, that's what we need. And we also need to change this other provision to say that the alternative study roll has to be filed in that system that I told you about, identifying as a supplemental roll for limited purposes. And there might need to be some additional language here, but still, that's what we need. And now you got to ask, well, what is the process for the Comptroller to change this policy? I looked into it. It's too long. I've got good news. We got a way around that. There's another government code that says that they can make emergency rules. It says a state agency can adopt emergency rules for certain purposes. One of them is for imminent peril to public health, public safety, or right here, this is the word that we need to see, or welfare. So what qualifies under public welfare to justify an emergency rule change? I can tell you this, I'm a big dove hunter. Me and my boys go dove hunting every year. In 2023, there was some kind of misprint on the hunting dates for the South Zone, and it was going to mess something up, cause the harvesting totals to get messed up somehow. And so the Texas Department of Wildlife enacted an emergency rule to change the dates around somehow so that there wouldn't be any kind of confusion or issue. That, I agree with them. That definitely should have constituted an emergency change. Anything to help the dove hunters, I'm on board with. But if that qualifies, this darn sure qualifies. If Castleberry has to shut down special ed programs, safety programs, who knows what else, just to try and save a few teachers' jobs, just to help these kids, because it's constitutionally mandated, they've got to make some reasonable adjustments to provide a free and public education system for kids. So they definitely should be able to justify the emergency rule for this case. They just need to know enough people are watching. So we got to send some emails, nice, friendly emails, just to let them know we're watching. I believe they'll do the right thing. I don't believe that we're in this position because there's some kind of evil mafia boss out there trying to get one over on us. I know sometimes it can feel that way, but I think that we're in the position we're in as a result of a multiple decade-long tug of war of people standing up saying, I'm not going to take this anymore, or there's got to be a better way, or I've got to help this person or accomplish this, and so we've got to fund this or that, and another group saying, no, over my dead body. We have constitutional amendments that mandate a free, efficient public education system. We have a constitutional amendment that says we will not have a state property tax. We will not have an income tax. But you know what? We also have a system of government that in order for us to be taxed, we must have representatives. No taxation without representation. And it's there for a reason, because we, the people, must be heard by those that are imposing the taxes. We want to have somebody in charge that cares and understands that when they impose a tax, it has an effect on the people. But they need to know that we care so that they can respond to that, and then we'll find out if they care. And so now it's our turn. It's your turn. We've just got to let our voices be heard. And I think the louder the voice, the more voices we have, the more effective we will be. So this is the time where you tap on the shoulder of your senator, your House representative, and anybody you might have a personal relationship with that might be serving on a board, especially those of you on the Tarrant Appraisal District Board of Directors. It would mean a lot if you took action and you asked for the Comptroller to take action on this. Anybody in Castleberry ISD, anybody in a school association on the state level, anybody on any level that understands what's at stake for these teachers or for these kids or for private property rights in general. We want to make sure that the Comptroller hears our voice. All you have to do is send a simple, friendly email that says, hey, can you please do the right thing for Castleberry? We're going to have to leave a lot of the technical stuff up to them. I've lined it all out in this video. You can elaborate more than that if you want to in your email, but the primary thing is just for them to see an email from you so that they know that we are watching, so that this thing lands the right way, so that our future is intact and our voices are heard.
The chair calls Renee Smith Faulkner.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Renee Smith Faulkner, and I serve currently as the superintendent of Castleberry ISD. I have been in this district for 34 years, and the district has never experienced such a devastating financial crisis that we face. Despite these concerns and the outcries by the local school districts, the board proceeded with an immediate approval. Our funding loss would take effect immediately. Losing $3.5 million is equivalent to defunding an entire elementary campus, which is at capacity, and more students are coming to our district every day. We're growing. To put this into perspective, $3.5 million funds the salaries and benefits of 45 of our teachers. It's 18% of our entire teaching staff. Our 3 elementary schools are already near capacity, with one campus employing 41 teachers, another 48, and a third one at 36. All the options I have are closing a campus that is near capacity. Where do I put the students? I have no room. Increasing classroom sizes to 35 or more.
That ain't good. Email the Comptroller.